It all started with Harold, a 68-year-old retired school principal from Vermont, who lived a quiet life filled with gardening, jazz records, and Sunday chess games at the community center. Harold had always considered himself a picture of aging gracefully. He didn't smoke, rarely drank, and kept his mind sharp with daily crosswords. But there was something he never quite felt comfortable discussing. Not with his doctor, not with his friends, and certainly not with his adult children. It was a private habit, a release, something that had helped him sleep since his 30s. Masturbation. To Harold, it seemed harmless, even necessary at times. But when subtle changes in his energy, mood, and even heart rate began appearing, he couldn't help but wonder, was this really as safe as he always believed? As odd as it may sound, Harold isn't alone. In fact, studies show that more and more seniors continue to masturbate well into their 60s, 70s, and even beyond. And in most cases, doctors agree that maintaining sexual expression later in life can support mental health, circulation, and hormonal balance. So why would some health professionals be raising red flags about masturbation after the age of 65? The answer isn't as simple or as comfortable as most expect. Because in some cases, especially when the body begins to show signs of cardiovascular strain, neurological changes, or chronic inflammation, this common habit might become a hidden risk. A risk not because of the act itself, but because of what it demands from a body that may no longer be built for it, especially when it's done in secret, with excessive frequency, or to cope with deeper emotional stress. To understand the issue, let's first dive into what actually happens inside the body during masturbation. When a person over 65 engages in sexual stimulation, the nervous system activates the sympathetic branch, the fight-or-flight response. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, breathing deepens. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and oxytocin are released. For a younger person, this can feel energizing. But for someone in their late 60s or 70s, especially those with underlying health conditions such as arrhythmia, hypertension, or prostate enlargement, this can push the body into dangerous territory. The sudden spike in cardiovascular activity can act as a trigger, a silent tripwire for those already on edge physically, sometimes without them even realizing it. Now, let's be clear. Masturbation in itself is not the enemy, but overdoing it, ignoring your body's warning signs, or using it to escape other emotional issues, this is where trouble starts. Dr. Ellen Gardner, a senior health specialist who has worked with aging populations for over 25 years, explains it this way. When older adults use masturbation as a coping mechanism for isolation, anxiety, or depression, especially without physical touch, intimacy, or emotional connection, it can reinforce feelings of loneliness rather than resolve them. In other words, what begins as stress relief can quickly evolve into a cycle of dependency. And this pattern can have real biological consequences. Not only can it disrupt sleep cycles and hormonal balance, but it can also strain the nervous system and create psychological dependency that often goes unspoken. In Harold's case, the first warning sign came in the form of subtle fatigue, a foggy feeling in the mornings. Then came palpitations. At first, he dismissed it. Just age catching up, he thought. But the symptoms worsened, and when he finally brought it up during a routine checkup, his doctor noticed something concerning. A pattern of elevated blood pressure spikes not accounted for by diet or exercise. After some gentle questions, Harold revealed his nightly habit. His doctor didn't scold him. Instead, she explained that the issue wasn't that he masturbated, but that he relied on it daily, often late at night, and that his heart might be reacting more intensely than it used to. It wasn't a moral problem, it was a physiological one. And here's where the story gets deeper and more relevant to all of us, especially those over 65. Because what Harold experienced isn't rare, and the medical community is beginning to pay attention. In recent years, researchers have started to examine the nuanced ways older adults interact with their own sexuality. What they've found is this: masturbation after 65 is often done in silence. It's rarely discussed with doctors. And because of this silence, many seniors may not realize when their body is trying to say, "This is too much," not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, hormonally. And by the time the warning signs show up, the habit has already become embedded in their routine. So, does this mean seniors should stop masturbating altogether? Absolutely not. But it does mean something far more important: awareness. Being in tune with your body. Knowing when a private act is actually a public health concern within your own system. It means having the courage to talk about it, to ask questions, and to recognize that just because something has always felt normal doesn't mean it's still safe at your age, especially when combined with other stressors, medications, or chronic conditions that already tax your heart and nervous system. Let's go deeper. Harold's story may have opened the door to a subject most prefer to keep locked away, but it's exactly in this vulnerability that countless others find reflection. In stage 2 of this journey, we move beyond one man's experience to uncover what modern science is now revealing about aging, stimulation, and the hidden physiological demands that come with solo sexual activity. What happens when something as instinctual as self-pleasure becomes biologically unsustainable, or worse, dangerous? And how can one recognize the difference between healthy sexual expression and silent overuse? Let's begin with the body's internal response. During any sexual activity, the body undergoes a cascade of hormonal changes. Dopamine surges, leading to feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. Oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, creates a sense of bonding, even when there is no partner present. Cortisol, the stress hormone, drops, while endorphins give a temporary mood lift. This chemical cocktail is beneficial when balanced, but in seniors, especially those taking certain medications, it can create unintended consequences. For instance, medications commonly prescribed for high blood pressure, diabetes, or depression can interact with hormonal activity, reducing the body's ability to regulate those surges. The result? Sudden fatigue, lightheadedness, irritability, or even unexpected anxiety after climax. These post-orgasmic crashes may be dismissed as just getting older, but in reality, they're red flags from a body struggling to keep up with overstimulation. One study published in the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology found that among seniors with known cardiovascular disease, sexual activity, including masturbation, could cause temporary spikes in heart rate and blood pressure equivalent to light exercise. Now, that sounds manageable, until you realize that many older adults engage in these activities alone, without preparation, and often late at night, when the body is least prepared for cardiovascular stress. Add to this the lack of movement or warming up, which would be present in typical exercise, and you have a situation where the heart is suddenly jolted out of rest. For someone with arrhythmia or an undiagnosed blockage, this could trigger chest pain, shortness of breath, or, in rare cases, cardiac events. But the risks aren't just physical. There's also the issue of emotional isolation. In multiple senior wellness studies, researchers observed that solo sexual habits, when performed excessively or compulsively, can reinforce psychological isolation. That's because the brain, while receiving a surge of pleasure from orgasm, doesn't receive the relational or social input it typically would during partnered intimacy. Over time, the brain can begin associating pleasure strictly with solitude. This rewires emotional pathways, making social interaction feel less rewarding and further pushing the individual into isolation. For people over 65, this kind of psychological detachment can be devastating. It's been linked to increased rates of depression, disrupted sleep patterns, and even cognitive decline. Let's take another example. Martha, a 72-year-old widow living in California. After losing her husband of 40 years, she found herself turning to masturbation as a coping mechanism. At first, it was a way to feel connected, to remember what intimacy felt like. But as the months went on, it became her only form of emotional release. What started as once or twice a week became nightly, and sometimes more than once per day. She began feeling dizzy, her sleep worsened, and her sense of connection with her adult children faded. "I didn't realize how much I was retreating," she said in a support group interview. "I was chasing comfort, but it started to feel like I was just disappearing from the world." Her story mirrors that of many seniors who unknowingly begin to lean on solo pleasure as a substitute for emotional connection, and suffer the consequences in silence. Experts in geriatric psychology warn that sexual habits in later life must be viewed through a more holistic lens. It's not just about what's physically safe, it's about emotional well-being, social integration, and biological limitations. Dr. Reuben Clark, a leading expert in senior neuroendocrinology, states, "Older adults often underestimate how powerful the endocrine system remains, even in old age. Every orgasm, every arousal event, still sends ripples through the nervous system and hormone centers. And if the body isn't buffered by good sleep, nutrition, hydration, or emotional grounding, those ripples can feel like waves." His warning? Pleasure should never come at the expense of balance. So where is the balance? It starts with listening. Not just to your body, but to your patterns. Ask, am I doing this to relax, or am I escaping something deeper? Am I in control of the habit, or does the habit now control me? These questions might sound heavy, but they open the door to the kind of introspection that helps reclaim control. Seniors are often told to watch their blood sugar, their cholesterol, their blood pressure, but rarely are they encouraged to monitor their relationship with their own pleasure. And that's a mistake, because when the pleasure becomes automatic, expected, or habitual, it begins to override other sources of well-being: walks in nature, social meals, laughter, creative hobbies. In some cases, the brain starts to demand more dopamine through masturbation because it's not getting it anywhere else. That's when the cycle becomes a trap. But there's hope and power in awareness. There are ways to break this cycle without giving up sexuality entirely. For some, it's about reducing frequency and exploring other forms of intimacy like touch therapy, massage, or even partnered non-sexual closeness. For others, it might be as simple as moving the habit earlier in the day when the body is more resilient, or pairing it with breathwork and stretching to support cardiovascular health. In more sensitive cases, speaking with a therapist trained in senior sexuality can help reframe the experience, transforming a compulsive behavior into a more conscious and joyful act. Let's now move into the final and most empowering part of this journey: solutions. Because while the risks are real, the truth is even more liberating. Sexuality after 65 doesn't have to fade, and it doesn't have to harm. It simply needs to evolve. Seniors like Harold and Martha aren't cautionary tales. They're wake-up calls. Reminders that intimacy, even in solitude, must be treated with the same care and intention as every other part of aging well. This is the beginning of a smarter approach, one that honors desire but also respects the body's new rhythms, limitations, and needs. So what can be done? First, we must understand that sexual expression in later years should be intentional. That means pausing long enough to consider why you're engaging in it. Is it for relaxation, connection, escape? Just as we've learned to eat more mindfully, exercise more cautiously, and rest more deeply as we age, our relationship with self-pleasure must also be conscious. Experts recommend starting by tracking patterns. Keep a private journal, noting the time of day, your emotional state before and after, and any physical symptoms. Patterns will emerge. Perhaps you feel dizzy when you masturbate late at night, or more energized when you engage in the morning. Perhaps it's always on days when you feel isolated or anxious. Awareness is your foundation, and from there, you can begin to create boundaries that support health rather than erode it. Next comes adjustment. Many seniors assume that their sexual routines must look the same as they did in their younger years. But the body has changed. Blood vessels are less elastic. Nerve sensitivity may decrease. Hormonal levels shift. That doesn't mean pleasure is gone. It just means the path to it is different. Slower. More nuanced. Techniques that worked quickly before may now take more time. And that's not a flaw, it's an opportunity. An opportunity to explore more gentle forms of stimulation, to incorporate mindfulness practices like breathwork, and to view the experience not as a race to climax, but as a journey of sensation and presence. Studies show that seniors who incorporate conscious breathing and even meditation into their self-pleasure routines report less post-orgasm fatigue, fewer sleep disruptions, and more overall emotional satisfaction. Let's talk about alternatives, because for many over 65, masturbation becomes the default. Not because it's the most satisfying, but because it's the most available. That needs to change. Healthy touch doesn't have to be sexual. Simple things like foot massages, warm baths, therapeutic massage, or even skin brushing can release oxytocin and reduce cortisol. These forms of touch calm the nervous system and foster body awareness. For seniors in relationships, rediscovering non-sexual forms of intimacy, like long hugs, hand-holding, or back rubs, can reignite emotional bonds and reduce the urge to retreat into solo habits. And for those who are single, there are connection-based alternatives: senior dance classes, laughter yoga, group art therapy. These experiences stimulate the same parts of the brain associated with pleasure, connection, and dopamine release. They're not replacements for intimacy, but they are powerful supplements that keep the brain balanced and the spirit lifted. Another critical step is talking to your doctor. It might feel awkward, but open conversations about sexual health can uncover deeper issues. For example, a man experiencing exhaustion after masturbation might be suffering from sleep apnea or low testosterone. A woman who feels anxious or foggy after climax may be dealing with medication side effects or a thyroid imbalance. These are not sexual issues, they're systemic. And by addressing them, pleasure can return in a safer, more supported way. Doctors trained in geriatric care increasingly recognize how vital sexual wellness is to overall health. So don't wait until something goes wrong to bring it up. Make it a routine part of your wellness check-ins. Mental health professionals can also play a vital role. Masturbation used as a coping mechanism for grief, loneliness, or unresolved trauma can become compulsive without a person even realizing it. Therapists who specialize in aging populations can help reframe those needs, offering new strategies for self-soothing, emotional processing, and even rediscovery of one's sexual identity in older age. And let's not forget the role of technology. Yes, even for seniors. There are now wellness apps specifically designed for older adults, offering guided meditations, breathwork practices, and even audio erotica created for mature listeners, with slower pacing and more emotional depth. These tools bridge the gap between desire and well-being, allowing seniors to stay connected to their sensuality without overstimulation. And perhaps the most powerful strategy of all is connection. Because what so many seniors are truly seeking, even when they turn to solo pleasure, is a sense of closeness, of being seen, touched, understood. That's why community matters. Whether it's through support groups, friendship circles, faith communities, or volunteering, regular social engagement rewires the brain to associate fulfillment not just with physical pleasure, but with emotional resonance. When that happens, the need for high-frequency stimulation often naturally fades, replaced by a deeper sense of belonging. Harold, for instance, didn't stop masturbating completely. But he made changes. He now only engages when he feels well-rested and balanced, and only during the day. He pairs the act with stretching and calming music, and he pays attention to how his body responds. More importantly, he joined a local senior wellness group where open conversations about aging, sexuality, and health are encouraged. He no longer feels shame around the topic. And most of all, he doesn't feel alone. So, what's the final message here? Masturbation after 65 is not the villain, but ignorance is. Habit without awareness is. Isolation disguised as pleasure is. When we understand our changing bodies, when we allow ourselves to adapt, to talk, to connect, and to care, we reclaim not just our sexuality, but our health, our balance, and our dignity. The goal is not to stop. The goal is to evolve, to age not in silence, but in strength. And in that space, pleasure not only survives, it thrives.